they called us debt collectors. The galaxy's bottom feeders. The species so desperate for credits that we'd chase down anyone, anywhere, for any amount owed. What they didn't understand was that humans don't just collect money, we collect on every debt, every slight, every broken promise. And, when the Galactic Council decided to betray the species that had been faithfully serving them for 3 centuries, they created a debt so massive that the entire galaxy would pay for it. The universe is about to learn why you should never, ever, stiff a human on what they're owed. Because when humanity finally comes to collect, payment is always extracted in full, with interest. Marcus Chen had been collecting debts across the galaxy for 15 years, and he'd learned one universal truth: everyone paid eventually. Today's debtor was a Valkyrie merchant named Thas who owed the Terran Collection Agency 47,000 credits for a shipment of Earth-grown coffee that had somehow vanished from his cargo hold. The coffee hadn't vanished, of course. It had been sold on the black market on Rigel Prime for triple the original price. The merchant's compound on Kepler 442b looked impressive from the outside: crystal spires that caught the binary sunset, automated defense turrets that tracked Marcus's shuttle as it approached, and enough electromagnetic shielding to stop a small fleet. But Marcus had dealt with impressive before. Impressive didn't pay debts. "Mr. Thas," Marcus said into his communicator as his shuttle settled onto the landing pad. "This is Marcus Chen from the Terran Collection Agency. I'm here about the Stellar Imports invoice dated Standard Galactic Month 7, Year 2387. Total amount due is 47,230 credits, plus accrued interest of 8,912 credits." The response came through his translator with the wet, clicking sounds of agitated Valkyrie. "Human debt collector, you have no authority here. This world is sovereign Valkyrie territory. Your pathetic collection agency has no power beyond your miserable little planet." Marcus smiled as he stepped out of his shuttle. The smile wasn't friendly. "Mr. Thas, I need to correct you on something. The Terran Collection Agency doesn't operate from Earth. We operate everywhere. And, as for authority, well, that's what we're here to discuss." The compound's main entrance dilated open, revealing 3 Valkyrie guards armed with plasma rifles. Valkyrie were tall, insectoid beings with chitinous plates covering their torsos and forearms ending in razor-sharp claws. They were natural predators who had conquered 17 worlds before humanity had even discovered fire. The guards chittered among themselves, probably discussing the best way to dispose of a single human. Marcus walked toward them without reaching for any weapons. He carried a small briefcase and wore a simple black suit that wouldn't look out of place in any corporate boardroom across the galaxy. The guards' translator units crackled to life. "Human, you will leave now or be removed permanently," the center guard announced. "I appreciate the warning," Marcus said, still walking. "But I have a job to finish. Mr. Thas owes my client money, and I always collect what's owed." The guards raised their weapons. Plasma rifles could turn a human into vapor in seconds. But Marcus kept walking, and when he was 3 meters away, he stopped and opened his briefcase. "Before this gets unpleasant," he said, pulling out a datapad, "you might want to look at this." He tossed the datapad toward the lead guard, who caught it reflexively. The screen lit up with official documentation from the Galactic Trade Commission, stamped with the seal of the Unified Banking Consortium, and countersigned by representatives from 12 different governments. The guard's compound eyes widened as he read. His chittering grew more agitated, and he quickly passed the datapad to his companions. All 3 guards stepped back. "What is this?" the lead guard demanded. "That," Marcus explained, "is a universal collection authorization, issued by the Galactic Trade Commission under Resolution 7749. It gives the Terran Collection Agency full authority to pursue debt recovery anywhere in the galaxy, using any means necessary, with the full backing of the Unified Banking Consortium and the Galactic Peacekeeping Force." Marcus took another step forward. "Now, according to this authorization, Mr. Thas has exactly 1 standard hour to produce payment in full, or I am legally entitled to seize assets equivalent to the debt plus damages. The funny thing about damages, gentlemen, is that they compound very quickly when debtors resist collection efforts." The guards looked at each other, then back at the datapad, then at Marcus. The Universal Collection Authorization was real. Every species in the galaxy had signed the treaty that created it, including the Valkyrie. It had been humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement, convincing the galaxy that standardized debt collection would benefit everyone. What none of them had realized was exactly how good humans would be at collecting. We must consult with Mr. Thos, the guard said finally. Of course, Marcus replied. But, I should mention that my shuttle's computer is automatically updating the debt amount every minute I'm here. Administrative costs, travel expenses, hazard pay. It's all quite legal under subsection 42 of the authorization. The guards chittered frantically and disappeared into the compound. Marcus waited exactly 60 seconds, then followed them inside. The interior of the compound was designed to intimidate visitors. High ceilings, sharp angular decorations, and walls lined with weapons from Thas's warrior ancestors. But Marcus had been in countless intimidating buildings. He'd collected debts from crime lords, dictators, and beings that could tear a human in half with their bare appendages. Fear was a tool, and, like any tool, it was only effective when used properly. He found Thas in what appeared to be a war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the compound's defenses. The Valkyrie merchant was massive even for his species, with decorative scarring across his chitinous plates that indicated high military rank. 4 guards flanked him, all armed and looking nervous. Human, Thas said, his voice rumbling through the translator. You make a mistake coming here. This world is mine. My guards number in the hundreds. My weapons could level a city. What makes you think one soft human can threaten me? Marcus set his briefcase on the table between them. Mr. Thas, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to collect a debt. Those are very different things. I owe your kind nothing. The coffee shipment was lost in transit. Space pirates, perhaps. These things happen. The coffee shipment was sold on Rigel Prime by your business associate Vex Holland. The transaction was recorded by the Rigel Trade Authority. The credits were transferred to your private account on Centauri Banking Station. Would you like me to provide the transaction codes? Thas's mandibles clicked angrily. Even if what you say is true, you cannot prove it in any court. I don't need to prove it in court, Marcus said, opening his briefcase again. I only need to prove it to the satisfaction of the Terran Collection Agency. He pulled out another device, a small scanner that immediately began beeping as it analyzed the room. This is a forensic debt scanner. It's designed to locate assets that can be seized to satisfy outstanding debts. Right now, it's cataloging everything in this compound. You cannot seize anything here, Thas snarled. This is sovereign Valkyrie space. Actually, I can. According to the Universal Collection Authorization, debts incurred in galactic commerce supersede local sovereignty laws. Your government signed that treaty, Mr. Thas. The scanner beeped more rapidly, and Marcus checked the display. Interesting. According to this scan, the total value of assets in this compound is approximately 2.7 million credits. That's significantly more than what you owe, which is good news for you. Good news? Well, it means I won't have to seize the compound itself. Just enough to satisfy the debt. Let's see. Marcus consulted the scanner again. Your weapons collection is worth about 60,000 credits. That should cover everything. Thas lunged forward, but stopped when Marcus didn't even flinch. You will not touch my ancestral weapons. Then, pay your debt. 47,230 credits, plus 8,912 in interest, plus another 4,715 in collection costs accrued since I arrived. Total amount now due, 61,857 credits. And, if I refuse? Marcus smiled that unfriendly smile again. Mr. Thas, do you know why humans are so good at debt collection? Because you are desperate scavengers who will do anything for money. No. It's because we understand something that most species don't. Debt isn't just about money. It's about obligation. It's about trust. It's about keeping your word. And, when someone breaks their word, when they violate that trust, they create an imbalance that must be corrected. Marcus closed his briefcase and stood up. The Terran Collection Agency doesn't just collect monetary debts, Mr. Thas. We collect on every obligation. Every broken promise. Every betrayal. And, we always collect in full. Are you threatening me, human? I'm explaining to you how the universe works. You took something that wasn't yours. You violated an agreement. You created a debt. Now that debt must be paid. If you refuse to pay it voluntarily, then I will take what is owed by force. That's not a threat, Mr. Thas. That's just mathematics. The Valkyrie merchant stared at the small human for a long moment. Marcus stood perfectly still, waiting. Finally, Thas's shoulders sagged. The credits will be transferred within the hour, he said. Excellent. And, Mr. Thas? Next time you do business with humans, I suggest you honor your contracts. We have very long memories, and we never forget a debt. Marcus walked out of the compound without looking back. His shuttle lifted off exactly 1 hour later, after the debt had been paid in full with a prompt payment bonus that more than covered his travel expenses. As his ship entered hyperspace, Marcus received a priority message from TCA headquarters on Luna. The message was brief, but it made his blood run cold. Agent Chen, return to base immediately. The Galactic Council has declared the Terran Collection Agency an illegal organization. All human debt collectors are now considered criminals. The galaxy has decided it no longer wants to pay what it owes. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Then, he began to smile. It wasn't his unfriendly smile this time. It was something much worse. The galaxy had just created the largest debt in history. And humanity was very, very good at collecting. The Luna headquarters of the Terran Collection Agency looked like any other corporate office complex, complete with sterile white corridors and motivational posters featuring humans from different Earth cultures standing together under slogans like Unity through Purpose and Every Debt Paid Forward. But, beneath the surface, the TCA was something entirely different. It was humanity's quiet revolution, disguised as a business. Director Sarah Okafor stood before the largest gathering of collection agents in TCA history. 2,000 humans filled the main auditorium, representing every inhabited world in human space. They came from Earth's megacities, from the mining colonies of Proxima Centauri, from the agricultural worlds of the Kepler system, and from the frontier settlements that pushed ever deeper into the galaxy. 3 days ago, Director Okafor began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic system. The Galactic Council voted to declare the Terran Collection Agency an illegal organization. The vote was unanimous among non-human representatives. A murmur rippled through the audience. Marcus Chen, sitting in the third row, felt his jaw clench. He'd spent the flight back from Kepler 442b wondering what could have prompted such a drastic decision. Now he was beginning to understand. The official reason, Okafor continued, is that our collection methods are too aggressive and destabilize interstellar commerce. The unofficial reason is that we've become too effective. In the past 5 years, the TCA has recovered over 40 billion credits in outstanding debts owed to human individuals and corporations. She paused, letting that number sink in. 40 billion credits that other species thought they could simply refuse to pay because we were just humans. 40 billion credits that the galaxy assumed we were too weak, too scattered, too naive to collect. The murmur grew louder, and Marcus could hear the anger building in voices around him. These weren't just debt collectors, they were humans who had spent their entire careers being underestimated, dismissed, and cheated by species that considered them inferior. They were wrong, Okafor said, and the room fell silent. But now they're scared. Scared because they've realized that humans don't just collect money. We collect on everything. Every insult. Every betrayal. Every time they looked down on us and assumed we would just accept their contempt. She touched a control, and a massive holographic display activated above the audience. It showed the known galaxy, with human settlements marked in blue, trade routes in green, and debt collection zones in red. The red zones covered nearly a quarter of civilized space. For 3 centuries, humans have been the galaxy's servants, Okafor said. We fought their wars, built their infrastructure, and provided them with everything from luxury goods to basic necessities. In return, they treated us like hired help. Useful when needed, disposable when convenient. Marcus thought about every collection he'd made over the years. The Andorian shipping magnate who had laughed when told he owed humans money. The Centaurian governor who had refused to pay for medical supplies because what can the humans do about it? The thousands of clients who had assumed that being human meant accepting whatever crumbs they decided to throw. The Galactic Council's decision to outlaw the TCA isn't just about money, Okafor continued. It's about power. They've realized that an organization capable of collecting debts across the galaxy is also capable of enforcing much more than financial obligations. The display changed, showing a timeline of human expansion. From first contact to the establishment of the TCA, every milestone was marked by humanity's willingness to work within the galactic system, to be patient, to be reasonable. For 300 years, we've played by their rules. We've been the junior partners in every alliance, the smallest voice in every council, the species that everyone could safely ignore. But what they never understood is that humans don't forget. We remember every slight, every broken promise, every debt unpaid. Agent Lisa Vasquez, a veteran collector from the Mars colony, stood up. Director, what's the Council's timeline for shutting us down? According to the emergency resolution, all TCA operations must cease within 72 standard hours. Any human found engaging in debt collection activities after the deadline will be classified as a criminal and subject to arrest by galactic peacekeeping forces. The anger in the room was palpable now. These were humans who had spent their careers proving that humanity could be trusted with responsibility, that they could operate on equal terms with the galaxy's older civilizations. Now they were being told that their success itself was criminal. Agent Robert Kim from the Tau Ceti trading post raised his hand. What about our current caseload? I've got 7 active collections worth a combined 200 million credits. All cases are to be suspended immediately, Okafor replied. We're supposed to simply walk away from every debt currently being collected. Marcus stood up. The director recognized him immediately. Marcus had the highest individual collection total in TCA history. Agent Chen. Director, with respect, when has humanity ever simply walked away from something we were owed? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every agent in the room knew the answer. Humanity didn't walk away. Humans were patient, methodical, and absolutely relentless when it came to settling scores. It was what made them such effective debt collectors in the first place. Agent Chan raises an interesting point, Okafor said carefully. The Galactic Council seems to believe that outlawing the TCA will end human debt collection activities. They appear to think that we'll simply accept their decision and move on to other careers. She touched another control, and the display shifted again. This time it showed detailed financial records, not just the 40 billion in recovered debts, but hundreds of additional outstanding obligations. Contracts unfulfilled, payments overdue, agreements broken. The total amount owed to humans by the rest of the galaxy was staggering. What they don't understand, Okafor continued, is that disbanding the TCA doesn't eliminate the debts. It just removes the official, civilized method of collecting them. Agent Yuki Tanaka from Europa Station spoke up. Are we talking about going underground? I'm talking about remembering who we are, Okafor replied. Before the TCA, before the official channels and diplomatic protocols, how did humans handle unpaid debts? The question didn't need an answer. Everyone in the room knew human history. They knew about collection agencies that operated outside legal systems. They knew about individuals who made personal crusades out of settling scores. They knew about humans who spent decades hunting down those who had wronged them. The galaxy has spent 3 centuries accumulating debts to humanity, Okafor said. Not just financial debts, but moral ones. Social ones. Every time they've treated us as lesser beings, every time they've assumed we would simply accept their disrespect, they've added to what they owe us. Marcus felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. He thought about Thas, the Valkyrie merchant who had tried to cheat human coffee growers. Thas had paid because the system forced him to pay. But what happened when there was no system? Director, Agent Vasquez asked, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the TCA officially complies with the Galactic Council's resolution, Okafor replied. All official operations will cease in 72 hours. All agents will be released from their contracts and free to pursue whatever careers they choose. She paused, and her smile carried the same cold edge that Marcus recognized from his own face when dealing with difficult debtors. What individual humans choose to do with their personal knowledge of outstanding debts is, of course, entirely up to them. The galaxy wanted to eliminate organized debt collection. They'll soon discover that unorganized debt collection is much, much worse. The implications of her words sank in slowly. 2,000 agents, each with years of experience in tracking down debtors across the galaxy. Each with detailed knowledge of who owed what to whom. Each with personal grievances against species that had treated them as inferior servants. They thought they were solving a problem, Okafor continued. Instead, they've just created a much bigger one. The TCA operates within legal boundaries. We follow procedures. We give debtors opportunities to pay voluntarily. Individual humans seeking personal satisfaction? Well, that's an entirely different matter. Agent Kim stood up again. What about our equipment? Our databases? Our contact networks? Officially, all TCA assets will be liquidated or returned to appropriate authorities, Okafor said. But, equipment malfunctions do happen. Databases can be corrupted. Files sometimes get lost in bureaucratic transitions. The message was clear. Every agent would walk out of TCA headquarters with everything they needed to continue collecting debts on their own. But, without the organizational structure, without the diplomatic protections, without the requirement to operate within galactic law. Marcus thought about his personal collection of case files. Thousands of deadbeat debtors, each one representing not just money owed but a personal insult to human integrity. He thought about his network of contacts across the galaxy, information brokers, ship captains, corrupt officials who could be bought or intimidated. The TCA had given him the tools to track down anyone, anywhere. Now they were telling him to use those tools however he saw fit. The galaxy wants to know what happens when humanity collects its debts without rules, Okafor said. I think they're about to find out. She touched the control one final time, and the display showed something that made everyone in the room catch their breath. It was a map of the galaxy, but this time the markings were different. Instead of trade routes and collection zones, it showed human settlements connected by ship movements, communication networks, and family ties. For the first time, everyone could see what the galaxy had failed to notice. Humans weren't just scattered individuals working for other species. They were a vast, interconnected web that touched every corner of civilized space. They ran shipping companies, operated communication relays, managed financial institutions, and provided security services. They were doctors, engineers, teachers, and traders. They were everywhere. And they all remembered every slight, every insult, every debt that other species thought they could simply ignore. The Galactic Council has just declared war on the most patient species in the galaxy, Okafor said quietly. They have no idea what they've done. The meeting ended in silence, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of humans making plans, calculating debts, and preparing to collect everything the galaxy owed them. With interest. 6 months after the Galactic Council disbanded the Terran Collection Agency, Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony found himself in the most uncomfortable position of his 300-year diplomatic career. The Galactic Council chambers, normally filled with the confident chatter of representatives from 100 worlds, had fallen into an uneasy silence as he prepared to address what some were calling the human problem. The problem had started small. Individual humans pursuing personal grievances. A human trader named Jennifer Walsh had tracked down a Centaurian shipping mogul who had refused to pay for 3 years' worth of rare earth minerals. When the Centaurian still refused to pay, Walsh had somehow convinced the crews of 17 different shipping vessels to refuse service to any Centaurian company. Within weeks, Centaurian trade had ground to a halt. On Rigel Prime, a human engineer named David Park had been cheated out of payment for designing a new water purification system. When the local government ignored his demands for compensation, Park had quietly introduced a virus into the system that made the water taste like rotting fish. The virus was perfectly harmless, but it made the water completely undrinkable. Park offered to provide the cure in exchange for payment of his original fee, plus damages for emotional distress, plus interest for the 6 months he'd spent being ignored. The Rigel government had paid. But these isolated incidents had quickly grown into something much larger and more coordinated. Humans throughout the galaxy had begun acting on grievances both old and new, and their methods were proving devastatingly effective. Honored delegates, Zethkar began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into galactic standard. We are gathered here to address an unprecedented crisis. In the 6 months since Resolution 7749 disbanded the Terran Collection Agency, human-initiated economic disruptions have caused an estimated 400 billion credits in losses across 17 sectors. A murmur ran through the chamber. Representative Vox of the Andorian Trade Consortium stood up. Ambassador, these aren't just economic disruptions. These are coordinated attacks on galactic commerce. Humans are systematically targeting anyone who has ever had a business dispute with their species. Zethkar nodded grimly. The humans appear to have maintained detailed records of every unpaid debt, every cancelled contract, every instance of what they consider to be unfair treatment. They are now acting on these grievances with remarkable coordination despite having no official organization. The truth was even more disturbing than what Zethkar was willing to admit publicly. The humans weren't just collecting money they were owed. They were systematically exposing corruption, manipulating markets, and leveraging their positions throughout galactic society to extract what they considered to be appropriate compensation for 3 centuries of being treated as inferior partners. On Vega Station, a human maintenance engineer named Sarah Kim had discovered that the station administrator had been embezzling funds meant for worker safety equipment. Instead of reporting it to authorities, Kim had quietly documented everything and, then, presented the administrator with a choice: pay a consulting fee equivalent to the embezzled amount, or have the evidence transmitted to every major news network in the sector. The administrator had paid. Similar incidents were occurring across the galaxy. Humans in positions of trust, and there were millions of them, were leveraging their access to information to settle scores both personal and professional. They were calling in favors from other humans, creating networks of mutual support that transcended planetary boundaries and species loyalties. What makes this situation particularly dangerous, Zethkar continued, is that humans have embedded themselves so thoroughly in galactic society that they have access to virtually every critical system. They maintain our communication networks, operate our transportation hubs, and manage many of our financial institutions. Representative Thas of the Valkyrie Commonwealth stood up. Marcus Chen had collected a debt from Thas 6 months earlier, and the experience had left the merchant with a deep understanding of how humans approached problem solving. The humans are patient, Thas said, his translation device conveying the fear in his voice. They don't act in anger. They plan. They coordinate. They wait for exactly the right moment to strike. This isn't random revenge, it's a systematic campaign. The example everyone was talking about involved the Tau Ceti agricultural disaster. A consortium of Tau Ceti farmers had refused to honor contracts with human agricultural technology companies, claiming that the humans had overcharged for basic farming equipment. The farmers had assumed that humans would simply accept the loss and move on. Instead, human engineers throughout the sector had quietly introduced subtle flaws into agricultural systems they maintained. Nothing dangerous, the humans were very careful about that, but enough to reduce crop yields by approximately 30%. The affected farms began experiencing equipment failures, irrigation problems, and crop diseases that seemed to emerge from nowhere. When Tau Ceti authorities had tried to bring in off-world agricultural consultants to solve the problems, they discovered that most of the qualified experts in the sector were either human or had business relationships with humans. None were available for hire. The situation had lasted until the original debts were paid in full, with interest, and public apologies were issued to the human companies involved. Then, miraculously, the agricultural problems had vanished as quickly as they had appeared. They're using our own interconnectedness against us, observed Representative Clax of the Silicon-based collective. We've spent centuries building trade networks and mutual dependencies. The humans have made themselves indispensable to these networks, and now they're leveraging that position. Zethkar brought up a holographic display showing galactic trade patterns over the past 6 months. The data was alarming. Human-controlled or human-influenced trade routes were operating normally, but commerce involving species that had outstanding disputes with humans was experiencing systematic disruptions. The humans have effectively created an informal economic embargo, Zethkar explained. They're not preventing trade entirely, but they're making it costly, unreliable, and frustrating for anyone they consider to be a debtor. The most unsettling aspect was how reasonable the humans appeared to be during negotiations. When confronted about their actions, they expressed surprise that anyone would object to the collection of legitimately owed debts. They provided detailed documentation of every grievance. They offered to resolve disputes through arbitration or mediation. They even agreed to payment plans for particularly large debts. But, if their reasonable offers were rejected, if their documentation was dismissed, if their humanity was questioned, then the problems began. Representative Vox spoke up again. We need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. How many humans are involved in these actions? Zethkar hesitated before answering. Intelligence estimates suggest that approximately 40% of humans in galactic society are actively participating in debt collection activities. Another 30% are providing support services, information, transportation, financial assistance. The remaining 30% appear to be maintaining neutrality, but even they are showing increased loyalty to other humans over their employers or local governments. The implications were staggering. Humans represented nearly 8% of the galactic population, but they occupied critical positions in infrastructure, commerce, and technology far out of proportion to their numbers. If 70% of them were acting in coordinated opposition to the established order, it represented a threat to the stability of galactic civilization itself. "They're treating this as a war," said Representative Morax of the Crystalline Hierarchy. "Not a military war, but an economic and social war. They've identified every point of leverage they have and they're using all of them simultaneously." The most recent incident had driven this point home with brutal clarity. The hegemony's premier luxury resort on Kepler 438b had refused to honor its contracts with human entertainment companies, claiming that human cultural offerings were too primitive for their sophisticated clientele. Within days, the resort had begun experiencing problems. The climate control systems developed mysterious glitches that made half the rooms uncomfortably hot. The gourmet food replicators began producing meals that technically met nutritional requirements but tasted like cardboard. The holo entertainment systems crashed repeatedly, usually during the most dramatic moments of whatever program was being viewed. When resort management had tried to bring in off-world technicians to solve these problems, they discovered that every qualified specialist in the sector was either unavailable, overbooked, or charging rates that were economically prohibitive. The problems had continued until the resort's corporate owners had not only paid the original contracted amounts to the human entertainment companies, but had also issued a formal apology and agreed to host a month-long festival celebrating human cultural achievements. "What's our legal position?" asked Representative Zethkar. "Can we prosecute individual humans for these actions?" The Council's legal advisor, a synthetic intelligence that had been analyzing galactic law for over a century, materialized as a hologram. "The legal situation is complex," the AI reported. "Individual humans are careful to operate within the boundaries of local law. They pay their taxes, honor their employment contracts, and avoid actions that could be classified as terrorism or sabotage. However, their coordinated activities constitute what human legal scholars would call malicious compliance, following the letter of the law while violating its spirit." "What about collective punishment? Economic sanctions against human worlds?" "Inadvisable," the AI replied immediately. "Human economic networks are too deeply integrated into galactic commerce. Sanctions would harm everyone, including the species attempting to impose them. Additionally, humans have made themselves indispensable to critical infrastructure. Attempting to remove them would likely cause system failures that would affect billions of beings." Representative Foss stood up again. "There's something else we need to consider. The humans aren't just collecting old debts. They're preventing new ones. Species that have historically defaulted on contracts with humans are finding it impossible to do business with human companies or human-allied organizations." This was true, and it represented a fundamental shift in galactic commerce. For the first time in galactic history, there were real consequences for breaking contracts with humans. Species that had built business models around cheating human companies were discovering that such practices were no longer sustainable. "They're teaching the galaxy a lesson," observed Representative Clax. "They're demonstrating what happens when you treat humans as disposable partners." Zethkar looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. Many of them represented species that had outstanding disputes with human individuals or companies. All of them were dealing with the economic disruptions that had followed the dissolution of the TCA. "The question before us," he said finally, "is what we're prepared to do about it. The humans have made it clear that they consider the dissolution of the TCA to be a breach of good faith. They've also made it clear that they intend to collect every debt they believe they are owed, regardless of our legal position." "Can we negotiate with them?" asked Representative Vox. "How do you negotiate with 800 million individuals acting independently?" Zethkar replied. "There's no human government to deal with, no central authority to make agreements with. Each human is pursuing their own grievances according to their own timeline." The truth that no one wanted to acknowledge was becoming increasingly clear. The Galactic Council had assumed that disbanding the TCA would end the problem of human debt collection. Instead, they had replaced a regulated, predictable organization with millions of individual humans who felt they had been betrayed by the very system they had faithfully served. The humans had been patient for 3 centuries. They had worked within the system, followed the rules, and accepted being treated as junior partners in galactic civilization. Now their patience was over. And the galaxy was beginning to understand that a patient human was the most dangerous thing in the universe. 1 year after the dissolution of the Terran Collection Agency, the galaxy had learned to fear a simple message that appeared on communication networks throughout civilized space: "This is a courtesy notice regarding outstanding obligations." The message was always polite, always professional, always accompanied by detailed documentation of exactly what was owed, to whom, and why. And always followed by consequences that were swift, devastating, and precisely calibrated to cause maximum disruption while remaining technically legal. Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the commercial liner Stellar Meridian, watching the space station designated as Haven Prime grow larger in the viewport. The station was humanity's newest and most ambitious project, a completely independent trading post positioned at the intersection of 7 major trade routes. What made Haven Prime unique wasn't its size or its technology, but its operating principle. It only did business with clients who had no outstanding debts to human individuals or companies. The galaxy had initially dismissed Haven Prime as an expensive joke. Who would voluntarily limit their customer base in such an arbitrary way? The answer, it turned out, was every species that wanted access to the most efficient, reliable, and cost-effective trading hub in their sector. "Mr. Chen," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez, former TCA agent and now Haven Prime's Director of Commercial Relations. "The Hegemony delegation has arrived. They're requesting immediate negotiations." Marcus smiled. The Hegemony had fought the human debt collection campaign longer and more stubbornly than any other major power. They had vast resources, ancient pride, and a political system that made admitting error nearly impossible. But even the Hegemony had limits to how much economic damage they could absorb. "How bad is their situation?" Marcus asked as they walked toward the station's diplomatic quarter. "Their shipping costs have increased by 400% in the past 6 months, Elena replied. "Every major human-controlled logistics company has classified Hegemony cargo as high-risk due to their history of contract violations. Insurance rates have gone through the roof. And 3 of their primary manufacturing worlds are experiencing critical supply shortages because human-managed supply chains have become unreliable for Hegemony customers." They passed through the station's commercial district, where representatives from dozens of species conducted business in an atmosphere of mutual respect that was almost unprecedented in galactic commerce. Haven Prime's operating principles were simple: all contracts were honored, all debts were paid on time, and all parties were treated as equals regardless of species. It was a radical concept that was spreading throughout human-controlled space. "What's their negotiating position?" Marcus asked. "They're claiming that individual grievances between humans and Hegemony citizens should be resolved through traditional diplomatic channels. They want to separate political relationships from commercial disputes." Marcus laughed. "They still don't understand. There are no political relationships anymore. There are only debt relationships." This was the fundamental shift that the galaxy was struggling to comprehend. Humans had stopped thinking in terms of interstellar politics and started thinking in terms of personal accountability. Every broken contract, every unpaid debt, every instance of disrespect had become a personal matter between specific individuals. And humans had very long memories for personal matters. They arrived at Conference Room 7, where the Hegemony delegation was waiting. Ambassador Zethkar looked older than when Marcus had last seen him, and considerably more nervous. The ambassador was accompanied by 2 financial advisors and a legal expert, all of whom were frantically reviewing data on portable displays. "Mr. Chen," Zethkar said, rising as they entered. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Ambassador," Marcus replied, taking a seat across from the delegation. "I understand you have a proposal." "The Hegemony is prepared to acknowledge that certain commercial disputes with human individuals may have been handled inappropriately in the past," Zethkar began carefully. "We're willing to establish a compensation fund to address legitimate grievances." "How much?" Elena asked bluntly. 50 million credits, to be distributed among affected parties as determined by an independent arbitration panel. Marcus consulted his datapad. "According to our records, documented debts owed to humans by Hegemony citizens and corporations currently total approximately 840 million credits. Your offer represents roughly 6% of what's actually owed. But many of those claims are inflated, or include excessive interest penalties, or are based on disputes that should have been resolved through existing legal channels," one of the financial advisors protested. Tell me, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, how many hegemony citizens are currently experiencing difficulties with their daily lives due to interactions with human-provided services? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the room knew the answer. Humans had integrated themselves so thoroughly into galactic civilization that avoiding contact with human-controlled services was virtually impossible. And those services had become increasingly unreliable for anyone with outstanding debts to human creditors. Mr. Chen, Zethkar said finally, you must understand that our government cannot simply pay arbitrary amounts based on unsubstantiated claims. We have procedures, legal frameworks, bureaucratic requirements. Of course you do, Marcus agreed. And, for 3 centuries, humans worked within those procedures. We filed claims through proper channels. We waited for bureaucratic processes to run their course. We accepted delays, denials, and dismissals because we were told that was how civilized beings resolved disputes. He stood up and walked to the room's large viewport, which showed the bustling commerce of Haven Prime's docking bays. Ships from dozens of worlds were loading and unloading cargo, conducting business with an efficiency that the galaxy had rarely seen. But we learned something interesting during those 3 centuries, Marcus continued. We learned that your procedures and legal frameworks were designed to protect you from us, not to ensure fair treatment. They were bureaucratic barriers designed to exhaust human patience and resources. That's not, the legal expert started to object. Let me give you a specific example, Marcus interrupted, pulling up a file on his datapad. Hegemony Mining Consortium, contract reference 7749 Alpha Delta. 3 human engineering firms provided detailed geological surveys for mineral extraction operations on Kepler 62c. Total contract value, 12 million credits. The surveys were completed on time and exceeded all technical specifications. Marcus turned back to face the delegation. The Hegemony Mining Consortium refused payment, claiming that the surveys contained cultural biases that made them unsuitable for hegemony use. When the human companies attempted to dispute this decision, they were informed that cultural bias determinations could only be appealed through the Hegemony Cultural Purity Commission, which had a waiting list of approximately 15 standard years. The cultural purity requirements are a legitimate aspect of hegemony law, Zethkar began. The Cultural Purity Commission doesn't exist, Marcus said flatly. It never existed. The Hegemony Mining Consortium invented it to avoid paying for work they'd already received. The human companies spent 2 years and 50,000 credits in legal fees trying to appeal to a fictional government agency. The silence in the room was uncomfortable. Elena consulted her own datapad. We have 17,000 similar cases involving hegemony entities, she said. Fictional legal requirements, non-existent appeals processes, bureaucratic runarounds designed to exhaust human resources. The pattern is quite clear. Even if some mistakes were made, Zethkar said desperately, surely you can understand that we cannot simply accept human demands for payment without proper verification. Actually, Marcus replied, that's exactly what you're going to do. But not because we're demanding it. Because it's the only way to restore normal commercial relationships with human-controlled entities. He gestured toward the viewport again. Do you see those ships out there? 40% of galactic commerce now routes through facilities like Haven Prime. Human logistics networks handle 60% of interstellar cargo transport. Human financial institutions process 75% of all cross-border transactions. The implications were clear. The galaxy's economy had become dependent on human participation to a degree that no one had previously realized. And that participation was now conditional on settling outstanding debts. You're holding galactic commerce hostage, the legal expert accused. We're providing galactic commerce, Elena corrected. We're just being more selective about who we provide it to. Marcus sat back down. Ambassador, let me make this very simple. The hegemony has outstanding debts to human creditors totaling 840 million credits. Until those debts are settled, hegemony entities will continue to experience difficulties accessing human-controlled services. And if we pay? Then, hegemony entities will be restored to good standing with human commercial networks. Future business will be conducted on the same terms as everyone else who honors their contracts. This is extortion, the financial advisor said. No, Marcus replied calmly, this is debt collection. Extortion would be if we demanded payment for something we hadn't provided. These are legitimate debts for services already rendered and goods already delivered. Zethkar looked at his advisors, then back at Marcus. 840 million credits would represent a significant portion of the hegemony's discretionary budget. The hegemony spends more than that on luxury accommodations for government officials every year, Elena observed. This isn't about the money, Ambassador. This is about acknowledging that humans deserve to be paid for their work. If we agree to this, Zethkar said slowly, what assurance do we have that individual humans won't continue to target hegemony interests? The same assurance anyone has, Marcus replied. Honor your contracts, pay your debts, and treat humans with the same respect you'd show to members of any other species. Do that, and you'll have no problems. The hegemony delegation huddled together for several minutes, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. Finally, Zethkar straightened up. The hegemony will need time to verify the specific claims and arrange for payment. Of course, Marcus said. We'll give you the same amount of time you typically gave humans to resolve disputes through your legal system. 15 years should be sufficient. 15 years? That's completely unreasonable. Actually, Elena said, checking her datapad, the average time for a human company to receive payment or resolution from hegemony legal processes was 18 years, assuming they received any resolution at all. 15 years is quite generous. We need a more reasonable timeline, Zethkar pleaded. Marcus considered this. 72 hours. 72 hours? That's the timeline you gave us to shut down the TCA. It seemed reasonable to you then, . The ambassador stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. 72 hours. We'll have an answer in 72 hours. As the hegemony delegation left the conference room, Elena turned to Marcus. Think they'll pay? Marcus looked out at the ships and traders conducting their business in the calm, professional atmosphere of Haven Prime. They'll pay. They'll pay, eventually. The galaxy's finally learning what humans figured out a long time ago. What's that? That trust is the foundation of civilization. And, once you break trust with someone, earning it back is very, very expensive. Outside the viewport, a hegemony cargo vessel was being turned away from a docking bay, its captain frantically arguing with station security. The ship would have to find another port, probably one that charged triple rates for the same services Haven Prime provided. The galaxy was learning, one expensive lesson at a time, that humans remembered everything. And they always collected what they were owed. 5 years after the dissolution of the Terran Collection Agency, Ambassador Zethkar found himself once again addressing the Galactic Council, but this time the subject was very different. The crisis that had begun with human debt collection had evolved into something that no one had anticipated, the fundamental transformation of galactic civilization. Honored delegates, Zethkar began, his voice carrying through chambers that were noticeably fuller than they had been in recent years. I stand before you to discuss Resolution 8847, which officially recognizes the Human Commercial Accord as the standard framework for interstellar trade relations. The resolution represented a complete reversal of the Council's position from 5 years earlier. Where once they had sought to eliminate human influence over galactic commerce, they were now formally acknowledging humanity's role as the architect of the most stable and prosperous period in galactic history. The numbers were undeniable. Galactic GDP had increased by 37% in the past 5 years. Contract disputes had declined by 89%. Payment defaults had virtually disappeared. The black market in stolen goods had collapsed entirely, unable to compete with legitimate trade networks that actually delivered what they promised. The transformation began with debt collection, Zethkar continued, but it has become something much larger. Humans have demonstrated that commerce based on mutual respect and reliable contract enforcement benefits everyone. The truth was even more remarkable than the official statistics suggested. Humans had used their debt collection campaign as the foundation for rebuilding galactic commerce from the ground up. Species that had initially resented paying old debts had discovered that dealing with humans offered advantages that more than compensated for the cost. Representative Morax of the crystalline hierarchy stood up. Ambassador, many of us are curious about the long-term implications of human commercial dominance. Are we simply trading one form of dependence for another? It was a fair question, and one that had been debated extensively. Humans now controlled or significantly influenced approximately 60% of galactic commerce, but their control operated differently than traditional economic domination. The Human Commercial Accord isn't based on dependency, Zethkar explained. It's based on reciprocity. Humans provide reliable, efficient services, and they expect the same in return. Any species that honors their contracts and treats their partners fairly has full access to human commercial networks. Marcus Chen, now Director of Commercial Relations for the Human Commercial Consortium, watched the proceedings from the observation gallery. 5 years of systematic debt collection had transformed him from an individual agent into one of the most influential beings in the galaxy. But the transformation hadn't been about power, it had been about changing the fundamental assumptions that governed how different species interacted. The genius of the human approach, continued Representative Thos of the Valkyrie Commonwealth, is that they've made trustworthiness profitable. Species that honor their contracts enjoy preferential trading terms, faster shipping, better customer service, and access to human technological innovations. This was the key insight that had emerged from years of careful observation. Humans hadn't simply punished unreliable partners, they had rewarded reliable ones. Species that paid their debts on time found themselves with access to exclusive trading opportunities. Governments that treated human citizens with respect discovered that their infrastructure projects were completed ahead of schedule and under budget. Corporations that honored their contracts found their goods given priority in human-controlled shipping networks. The galaxy had learned that being trustworthy wasn't just morally good, it was economically advantageous. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as humanity's unofficial ambassador to the Council, stood up in the gallery. "If I may address the Council," she said. Zethkar nodded. The chair recognizes Dr. Vasquez. "Honored representatives," Elena began, "I think it's important to understand that the transformation we've witnessed wasn't planned by any human authority. There is no secret human government coordinating these changes. What you've seen is the natural result of 800 million humans making individual decisions based on their personal experiences with galactic civilization. This was both true and somewhat disingenuous. While there was indeed no central human authority directing commercial policy, the informal networks that had emerged from the TCA's dissolution had proven remarkably effective at coordinating human responses to galactic events. Each human remembers how they were treated during the centuries when they lacked economic leverage," Elena continued. "They remember every broken contract, every delayed payment, every instance where they were dismissed as inferior partners. Those memories inform their current business decisions." Representative Vox of the Andorian Trade Consortium raised his hand. "Dr. Vasquez, is it true that humans maintain detailed records of every commercial interaction throughout the galaxy?" "Humans have excellent memories," Elena replied carefully. "And we believe that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. If someone has consistently honored their agreements, we're happy to do business with them. If someone has a history of defaulting on contracts or treating partners unfairly, we prefer to invest our time and resources elsewhere." What she didn't mention was the vast database that human communities had assembled over the past 5 years. Every commercial transaction, every broken promise, every instance of discrimination against humans was documented and cross-referenced. The database wasn't officially maintained by any organization, it was a collaborative effort by millions of humans who shared information through personal networks. Marcus smiled as he listened to Elena's diplomatic explanation. The database was one of humanity's greatest achievements, a collective memory that ensured no debt would ever be forgotten and no pattern of misconduct would go unnoticed. But it was also entirely voluntary. No human was required to contribute to it or consult it before making business decisions. They just chose to do so because it made their lives easier and their businesses more profitable. "The Council needs to understand," Elena said, "that humans aren't trying to dominate galactic commerce. We're trying to civilize it. For 3 centuries, interstellar trade operated on the assumption that might makes right, that larger species could bully smaller ones with impunity, that contracts were suggestions rather than binding agreements." She gestured toward the massive holographic display that showed real-time commercial activity throughout the galaxy. The display revealed a network of unprecedented complexity and efficiency, with goods and services flowing seamlessly between worlds that had previously struggled with basic trade relationships. "Humans changed those assumptions," Elena continued. "We demonstrated that reliable partners are more valuable than powerful ones. We showed that keeping your word is more important than having the biggest fleet. We proved that treating all species with equal respect creates more prosperity for everyone." The transformation was visible in countless small details. Shipping contracts now included penalty clauses for delays, and those penalties were actually enforced. Payment terms were standardized across the galaxy, with interest charges that made late payment genuinely expensive. Most remarkably, contract negotiations had become collaborative rather than adversarial, with parties working together to create agreements that benefited everyone involved. Representative Clacks of the Silicon-based collective spoke up. The council recognizes the benefits of current commercial arrangements, but many of us remain concerned about the concentration of economic influence in human hands. What safeguards exist to prevent abuse of this position? Marcus decided to answer this question himself. He stood up in the gallery, and Elena yielded the floor to him. Representative Clacks, Marcus began, the safeguard is very simple. Humans maintain our commercial influence only as long as we provide superior service to our partners. If we become complacent, if we start taking advantage of our position, if we forget the lessons we learned during our own centuries of powerlessness, then our partners will find alternatives. This was the elegant equilibrium that had emerged from years of commercial evolution. Humans maintained their influence by consistently earning it through superior performance, fair dealing, and reliable service. The moment they failed to live up to those standards, they would lose their partners to competitors who offered better terms. But there's a deeper safeguard, Marcus continued. Humans learned what it feels like to be the junior partner in every relationship. We learned what it's like to have our concerns dismissed, our expertise questioned, and our contributions undervalued. Those lessons stay with us. He looked around the chamber at representatives from dozens of worlds, many of whom had fought bitterly against human commercial practices before eventually embracing them. We know what it's like to be cheated, Marcus said quietly. We know what it's like to have our work stolen, our payments delayed, our dignity ignored. We remember what it felt like when the galaxy decided we were too weak to matter. The chamber fell silent. Everyone present remembered the period after the TCA's dissolution, when they had assumed that humans would simply accept the loss of their organization and return to their previous status as convenient servants. Humans will never forget those experiences, Marcus continued. But we also won't let them make us bitter or cruel. Instead, we use them to remind ourselves why fairness matters, why keeping promises is important, why every species deserves to be treated with respect. Representative Zethkar nodded slowly. Mr. Chen, does this mean that humanity is willing to formalize its role in galactic commerce? To accept official recognition as the primary commercial regulatory authority? Marcus shook his head. Humans don't want to regulate galactic commerce, Ambassador. We just want to participate in it on equal terms. The Human Commercial Accord isn't about control, it's about standards. Any species that maintains those standards has our full support and cooperation. And species that don't maintain those standards? Find themselves dealing with the consequences of their choices, Marcus replied simply. Just like individuals who don't pay their debts. The vote on Resolution 8847 was unanimous, but Marcus knew that the formal recognition was largely symbolic. The real transformation had already occurred in the millions of individual transactions that took place every day between humans and other species. Trust had been rebuilt one contract at a time, one payment at a time, one kept promise at a time. As the council session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Elena joined Marcus in the gallery. Think they've learned their lesson? She asked. Marcus looked down at the chamber floor where representatives from dozens of worlds were shaking hands and making plans for future cooperation. 5 years earlier, many of these same beings had voted to outlaw human debt collection activities. Now they were competing with each other to demonstrate their reliability as human commercial partners. They've learned that debt is more than money, Marcus replied. They've learned that every interaction creates obligations, that every broken promise has consequences, that every species deserves to be treated fairly. And, most importantly? Marcus smiled, not his old unfriendly collection agent smile, but something warmer and more satisfied. They've learned that humans have very long memories. And that when humans finally decide to collect what they're owed, they always collect in full. Outside the council chambers, the galaxy continued its business with an efficiency and fairness that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. Humans had transformed galactic civilization not through conquest or domination, but through the simple principle that everyone deserves to be paid what they're owed. The galaxy had learned to fear that principle. Now it was learning to live by it. And, surprisingly, everyone was better off as a result.